All right. Thanks, everyone. So this is my first attempt at guided reading for you regarding my newsletter. So yesterday I published week in review number 18 at my personal newsletter. So every week I write at least one article per week to most of the articles will be reviewing what's happening in China of the last week that I think will have a lasting impact beyond news cycles. So this is the weekly review number 18. So I will just help you go through some of the main points in this article. So I touch on three subjects for this issue. So the first one is, which I think is the most important issue of the past week, which is the real estate in China, the real estate policies in China. So we just had a fundamental shift in terms of policy, or you could call it a fundamental pivot. So not only the interest rates, the down payment policies have been changed, but most importantly, now the Chinese government has formally announced plans to purchase unfinished homes, okay, unsold homes from the market, right? So there are many unsold homes, or basically, some people also say inventories, unsold inventories on the market, which is creating a drag on the economy, right? So finally, the government is coming in with some real cash to purchase that from the market, right? So in response, see, this is the real estate sector in China. This is the CSI China Mainland Real Estate Index, right? This is a index of all the major real estate companies in China. It has a spectacular week, right? This is daily charts, right? So I was actually, planning to write about this move at the beginning of this week. I just didn't realize this thing happened so quickly. So you don't get to know it beforehand, before the policy becomes national. But normally, if you read my newsletter closely, you will expect a lot of these predictions based on the analysis or the of all the information that I have at my disposal. So this time, there are things that happen that could make you predict this policy beforehand, right? So one data point is, Vice Premier He Lifeng, Vice Premier, who is like one of the 20 most powerful people in China, who is in charge of financial stability in China. He visited a city called Zhengzhou, which is in central China. And so 2 days after he left, um, Zhengzhou announced a policy which is exactly about government purchasing unsold homes directly from the market. And that was in April, right? So, so this kind of thing does not happen randomly. It's in Chinese context, it's usually before a big policy move, there will be some local experimentation. And the Zhengzhou event was a experimentation of that. So it's predictable that after this Zhengzhou visit as well as policy, you're going to see um, the national policy as well, which the national policy did happen last week. Um, so talking about the local experimentation, um, one thing that is also related to that of the last week, which I found to be super interesting, is the new policy in so-called Lingang area, which is an area in Shanghai, which is a free trade zone in Shanghai that is essentially the port area of Shanghai. That's also where a lot of the foreign businesses were or are located, including the Shanghai Tesla Gigafactory, right? So this also in the same week, Lingang they announced a pretty interesting set of new data, cross-border data transfer regulations that specifically detail what they call use cases or scenarios where data transfer abroad can be permitted, or actually, the word they use is does not the data transfers use cases that do not need approvals, right? So that's a like a whitelist approach, a whitelist approach. So a whitelist of pre-approved actions. So that include many activities within the automobile sector. It also even includes the mutual fund industry, right? So for the first time, it specified the market research data, right, including all these industry research reports that are part of the mutual fund industry, the investment industry, basically, that need to be supplied overseas is explicitly allowed, right? So this is, if you live in the information bubble thinking that China is going to block data, China does not want outsiders to see the realities of the economy, of the industry. If you're in that camp, this type of policy would be surprising to you, but it just happens. Okay. So, so I talk about that, and an important part of that is this Lingang policy move, as well as what I just explained about the real estate market, the Zhengzhou case, is all of them are this application of what I call the innovative enclave. A lot of people they question about Chinese model in that Chinese model does have one big weakness because it's so centrally managed. Everything conformity, unity is more important than individualism. Um, but the weakness of that model is this type of system tends to create rigidity, and it could end up into the systematic sclerosis, which restrict innovation, right? So that's a key problem. So actually, China knows this inherent weakness of ourselves, and one way for us to battle this problem is to create all these, uh, innovative pockets, those enclaves, where different policies can be tried out, right? So on the extreme end of that is all these so-called SARs, the special administrative regions that include Hong Kong and Macau, right? So these places are where uh, virtually every piece of law and regulation, apart from the national security law, okay, apart from national security, every other laws are different, and they're free to do whatever they want with the laws, right? So for example, in Hong Kong, you can now trade crypto, you can mine crypto, you can even trade crypto ETFs, right? While in the mainland, it's 100% banned from any activity associated with crypto. So right, that's like one example of this so-called, you know, innovative enclave. And there are other cases, and I think this Lingang experiment is also within the same spirit, right? So so only in Lingang right now, the data activities within the whitelist are kind of allowed, permitted without question. But if you are not in Lingang, you are in other parts of China, you still have to think twice, and you still need to check with your authorities, right? So, but you can imagine if the Yinggang case is successful, this rule could, um, easily expand to other regions of China as well. So this is it is a centrally managed system, but there are pockets of innovation that can be allowed to develop rules of their own within a controlled environment. Okay, so the third topic I talk about, which is very probably the most newsworthy item of the last week, is about the new U.S. tariffs, right? So Biden administration just announced a series of tariffs on Chinese products, and one of the most important one is this 100% tariff on Chinese EVs. my main argument in this regard is I would think this tariff is more performative than substantive. Um, Mainly because China does not import many EVs to the US. Although Chinese EVs are very competitive now, in the US you can see almost no Chinese EVs. Actually, you cannot see many Chinese cars in general in the US. The Chinese automakers, they just systematically and strategically uh, do not look to the US market, right? So, so that's one thing. But I also think this performative acts has also been well communicated beforehand. You remember last month, Janet Yellen visited China. She created some headlines in China, not just about her food diplomacy, which I wrote about, but I think most important thing that she left China with was this assertion that China has this overcapacity problem. So the overcapacity problem I explained last time was a kind of foretelling of the things to come, which are more trade barriers, right? So so it does come in the last week, right? So, but I think the more important thing is I have the feeling that this tariff has been well communicated during that visit by Jenny Yellen almost a month ago. I think the U.S. side has made it clear that the tariffs are coming, but they are not going to be super harmful. The US side would need something to show that the Biden administration has been forceful in terms of competing with China, but China shouldn't take it too seriously. And in fact, China is not taking it very seriously this time. There has been mild response uh, from the China side. So there has not been any serious countermeasures against the U.S. tariffs. Everything happens. Um, you know, I think it's almost impossible that this kind of tariffs have not been communicated during that visit. Otherwise, the China side would feel betrayed, and there would be a lot of anger both in the domestic and international media, right? But all of these didn't happen. So I think so far so good, and China and U.S. seems to have found some better ways to both compete with each other, but also within a certain previously agreed upon framework. And I think that's good news. But I think the most interesting thing about the tariff itself is not actually the tariff, but also this whole perception of Chinese EV cars, right? So I talked about this before about the Chinese EVs. And I think the most interesting thing here is, no, first of all, there are actually two things, right? First thing is the idea that Chinese EVs are cheap. They are heavily subsidized. And so in order to fight those EVs, you have to exert tariffs on them. Okay. So first thing is, I think most of the Americans haven't realized that China's EVs are not only cheap, but super, super good. Right. So I drive a Tesla, a California made Tesla in Shanghai. But most of my friends now are switching to domestic brands, and many of them are having a great experience with that because at one half or even one third of the price, you enjoy a higher quality product. So there's no question about that. Chinese cars, Chinese EVs have been, you know, maybe the most globally competitive vehicles now in the market. So I think that's one thing that we need to be very clear about, right? So this is a new SUV from BYD, right? 5 years ago, when I think about BYD, I think about shitty cars. Now BYDs, with their core battery technology and great design, are producing so many good cars, beautiful products. Okay, So I think the second thing that we need to understand is that Chinese EV sector is not successful because of subsidies. I mean, the West has keep talking about subsidies, subsidies. And I think the reason the West talk about that is because the US auto sector is a product of the huge subsidies now, right? There are actually way more subsidies on the US side compared with the Chinese side. Um, so, in the name of protecting jobs, protecting industries, the US government, both the federal and the state, they are injecting a lot of subsidies to keep those big automakers afloat, right? It's not what happens in China. I talked about it before. I talked about it before last time. So last time when I wrote about Tesla in China, I talked about this uh, very interesting part of the Chinese industry policy towards EV, which is a catfish effect, right? So Tesla was allowed to operate under a 100% owned model in China with the expectation that many of the Chinese EV makers will go bankrupt. There will be less, the uncompetitive ones, they will go poof, right? So you know the names of BYD, NIO, these are the successful ones. But all these like Byton, Hi-Fi, Single Ladder, all these names that I know that you have not even heard of are the bankrupt ones. They are the failures, right? Um, they do not get so many subsidies. There are nobody subsidizing them, or if there are any subsidies, they don't really, create successes out of those subsidies, right? So it's the competition that is finally responsible for the success of an industry, not subsidies. And I found it ironic for someone in China explaining this very simple, basic market economy and the lesson of capitalism to the people in the US. I mean, it cannot be as difficult as that, right? So you have to understand it's not the subsidies, it's not state subsidies, it's the competition, it's the market forces that are the most important. And but right now, what the US is doing is to create non-market factors, to in the hope that their automakers can be saved. Um, while I think it's the exact opposite that the U.S. should be doing. So here, what I'm suggesting should be the right move, right, is to for the U.S. right to copy from China's own playbook. What China did, invite Chinese EV companies into U.S. market, setting up local joint ventures, right? And you could also force those Chinese companies to transfer technology in exchange for market, right? I use quotes for the word force here because it's not really forcing. It's a mutually agree upon arrangement, technology for market. Okay, so this is what China did, and it works for China. It also works for US. It could also work for US as long as US give up on the big ego, right, and really appreciate what's at stake now. Okay, so thank you. So I plan to do a guided reading each time for each article I write in my newsletter. But if you prefer reading, you can go check out my newsletter at robertwo.substack.com. Enjoy. Thank you.